On the edge of the known world, after 8 months lost at sea, 11 ships appeared on the horizon of a vast and unfamiliar continent. On 26 January 1788, the sails of the First Fleet cut through the waters of Port Jackson, carrying more than 400 people, among them over 700 convicts, into what would become modern Australia. It was not the arrival of heroes or conquerors in shining armor. It was the desperate experiment of an empire trying to solve a crisis, and the beginning of a nation forged in hardship. The fleet had departed from Portsmouth in May 1787 under the command of Captain Arthur Phillip. Britain's prisons were overflowing after the loss of the American colonies, where convicts had previously been transported. The government turned its eyes toward a distant land charted by James Cook in 1770 and claimed for the crown as New South Wales. It was remote, unknown, and daunting, yet strategically valuable. The 11 vessels, 2 naval escorts, and 9 transports carried men, women, and even children convicted of crimes that ranged from theft of bread to forgery. Many had been condemned not for violence but for poverty. They endured cramped quarters, disease, storms, and the constant uncertainty of a 24,000-kilometer voyage. Remarkably, under Philip's strict discipline and concern for sanitation, relatively few lives were lost compared to earlier convict transports. Still, the journey was brutal. The fleet stopped at Tenerife, Rio de Janeiro, and Cape Town before crossing the vast Indian Ocean to reach Botany Bay in January 1788. Botany Bay, however, proved unsuitable. Its soil was poor, freshwater scarce, and anchorage exposed. Within days, Philip sailed north to a magnificent natural harbor he named Sydney Cove, within Port Jackson, today's Sydney. There, on 26 January, the British flag was raised. A penal colony was born, but survival was anything but guaranteed. The early years were defined by hunger and fear. The settlers knew little of the land's climate or soil. Crops failed repeatedly. Livestock strayed into the bush. Tools broke. Rations were slashed to near starvation levels. The colony teetered on the brink of collapse more than once. In 1790, when the Second Fleet arrived, with hundreds of sick and dying convicts, victims of neglect and cruelty during the voyage, the crisis deepened. Disease spread. Supplies dwindled. Yet the colony endured. Convicts were assigned to hard labor, clearing forests, building huts, quarrying stone, constructing roads, and planting crops. Officers and Marines enforced strict discipline, but over time, a unique social experiment unfolded. Some convicts, after serving their sentences, were granted land. Former prisoners became farmers, traders, even community leaders. The rigid lines of British class society blurred under the harsh realities of the frontier. Among the most transformative figures was Governor Phillip himself. Unlike many colonial administrators of his era, he insisted that emancipated convicts be treated as free citizens once their terms ended. He also attempted, though imperfectly and inconsistently, to establish fair relations with the Indigenous peoples of the region, particularly the Eora Nation around Sydney Cove. These interactions were marked by misunderstanding, cultural shock, violence, and tragedy. The arrival of Europeans brought devastating diseases such as smallpox, which ravaged Aboriginal communities in the early years of settlement. For the First Nations peoples, 26 January 1788 was not a beginning but an invasion, a moment that would reshape their world irrevocably. While Britain saw opportunity and expansion, Indigenous Australians experienced dispossession and profound loss. This dual legacy remains central to Australia's identity today. Through the 1790s and early 1800s, the fragile penal outpost slowly transformed. Farming improved. Trade expanded. Whaling ships called at Sydney's harbor. Free settlers began to arrive. By the early 19th century, the colony was no longer merely a dumping ground for Britain's unwanted. It was becoming a society in its own right, transportation continued for decades, spreading to other settlements like Norfolk Island and Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania. Harsh punishments and chain gangs became part of colonial mythology. Yet, alongside brutality, grew resilience. Convict-built roads and bridges laid the physical foundations of the country. Government House, early barracks, and the first rough courts of law marked the emergence of civic order. What began as a prison at the end of the earth gradually evolved into a thriving colony. Gold discoveries in the 1850s transformed the population and economy. Waves of migrants arrived from Europe, China, and beyond. Self-government expanded. By 1901, the separate colonies federated into the Commonwealth of Australia, and it all traced back to those 11 ships anchored in Sydney Cove. Today, Australia is a prosperous, multicultural democracy and a significant global player in economics, science, sports, and culture. Its skyline gleams where once stood tents and timber huts. Its identity carries echoes of convicts and governors, settlers and sailors, but also the enduring cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have lived on the continent for more than 60,000 years. The story of the First Fleet is not a simple tale of triumph. It is a story of survival against staggering odds, of human suffering and determination, of empire and resistance, of injustice and opportunity intertwined. It is the transformation of a penal colony into a nation shaped by those who arrived in chains, those who commanded them, and those who had called the land home since time immemorial. From prison island to global nation, the sails that entered Port Jackson in 1788 carried more than convicts. They carried the fragile beginnings of a new chapter in world history, one written in hardship, endurance, and profound change.